Hey, what's up, man? I had a fun afternoon, just kind of taking in the rest of the league, thinking and reflecting on the Texans' offseason so far. It's weird to say that a team is aggressive when they're trading players away, and that's the sign of their aggression. And yet, I feel like this is a pretty damn bold and aggressive move to say, look, the offensive line was a problem last year. How are we going to handle it? We're gonna tear it all down.
Yeah.
That's what we're gonna do. And we're left in this moment where, man, it was cathartic in a lot of ways for a lot of people to trade away guys that had been huge blemishes this season and over the past seasons. And Laremy Tunsil, the best player amongst them, obviously. And for a lot of Texans fans to get rid of a lot of things that were headaches along the way. But now you are in that moment where, okay, this is where the real work begins. They were a bad offensive line last year. Getting rid of Laremy Tunsil didn't immediately or obviously make them a better offensive line. It made them a worse offensive line.
Yeah.
So now you've got some work to do, and it's building it back up from the foundation. As you said, as you appeared on Washington radio yesterday, and we're met with, frankly, disrespect over your opinions about exactly what the Texans are doing right now, particularly the Laremy Tunsil trade. Yeah, there's work to be done. But it feels like, all right, they're going to try to mold this offense in the image of the defense, which is molded in the image of DeMeco Ryans. And you got rid of some guys that were not playing swarm caliber football.
Yeah. Yeah, there's more moves coming. That's where I'm at with it. You know, people who are like, I can't believe you traded Laremy Tunsil. Oh, my God, look at the offensive line. If you had to play today, this is what it would be. I'm like, no, there's more moves coming. Now, I don't know, Seth, that the moves that are available to them right now in free agency, and then if you draft a guy, especially a tackle, that it's a guy who's going to be ready-made to play. Although DeMeco Ryans has said if we draft a guy in the first round, the hope and the expectation is that he can be a day one starter for us. We'll see how that goes. But that's kind of where I'm at. Like, yeah, if they had to go play a game today, I'd be really worried about the offensive line. But there's still time to get this thing fixed. And we haven't seen what it looks like yet with, as you pointed out several times, with Cole Popovich coaching the offensive line.
Right.
You're not plunking it down into the same, to use a magnificent Gladstone word, ecosystem as you were last year. It's very different now. New offensive coordinator. We don't know what the system's going to be. Maybe the guys they're bringing in now are tailored better to do what Nick Caley wants to do than the guys that they're shipping out of here. But yeah, I'm in total wait and see. I'm completely in favor of how they're going about this right now. Completely
well, and
in
I think
favor.
If you just look at it on the dollars and cents side of it, and it's probably something we neglected a little too much yesterday, but it was just so much fun to talk about the emotional stuff. You clear some cap space with Laremy Tunsil, and this is my answer to people outside of Houston who say, oh my gosh, the O-line was bad and you get rid of your one actually good pass protector. The offensive line was so bad that getting three guys around $10 million per year, if they average that are just solid veterans, not awesome, not awful, that's better for an offensive line than having one Laremy Tunsil and four guys that you can't depend on.
Yes, 100%.
So Laken Tomlinson, who they signed yesterday, he's nothing to get super excited about, but he's very, very affordable, and I think he's an upgrade over anybody that was playing at guard last year.
100% agree.
And
yes.
he's been very, very, very durable in his career. He's gone 8 years or so without missing a game. So that's the kind of stuff that isn't going to make headlines on ESPN.com or anything, but you got to worry about the sum total, place some of that Laremy Tunsil salary and cap hit with guys that at the very least can be dependable cogs in a five-man offensive line.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it probably, for Texan fans, if you're looking at the part where they get a little anxious, it's looking around in free agency at what other teams are doing. Like the Bears, on paper, have done a massive shift with the interior of their offensive line. They trade for Joe Thuney. They trade for Jonah Jackson. They signed Drew Dalman, who was the top center in free agency. The Vikings have been making big moves for the interior of their offensive line. They've got I'll call him a rookie quarterback. J.J. McCarthy has yet to start a game. So he's going to be a first-time starter next year. They signed Ryan Kelly. They signed Will Fries. the Texans had more work to do to tear it down in the first place than going and getting the guys to replace them.
Yeah, and look, there are guys out there in free agency right now that you wouldn't panic if they were one of the starting tackles for your team. I mean, I think Jedrick Wills is still out there. The Justin School, guys like that, guys whose names you're not going to recognize or anything, but that are viable starters. And then you draft and see what happens after that. And there could also still be trades along the way.
And if the Texans are able to put together an offensive line through replacements and through coaching that is middle of the pack, it's a major upgrade over last year.
There's, in a lot of ways, I think you think about last year's offseason and everybody had all this. It was going to be, oh, damn it. What was the name of the Rams offense?
Greatest show on turf.
Greatest show on turf, yeah. It was going to be the greatest show under a retractable dome with all these receivers and all these weapons you had out there.
Yep.
I think it feels very much like a back to basics. Nick Caley has used the word fundamentals multiple times when he's done his few interviews that he's done so far. He talks a lot about the nuts and bolts of operating a good offense. And it's not really as much about scheme as it is about guys playing good, fundamentally sound football. So I like it. I'm ready for blue collar and boring.
Yeah.
I want stability. I want something that can complement the skills of C.J. Stroud, but also complement the defense, because the defense yesterday, in trading away Kenyon Green, adds a guy who is a turnover machine in C.J. Gardner-Johnson.
Yeah.
And the defense, which already was a good enough defense to win a Super Bowl. If you don't look at that defense and you can say, yeah, there's certainly areas for improvement, but you don't look at it and say, yeah, that was holding them back. No. With a competent offense and C.J. Stroud playing to the highest of his abilities, yeah, you can win a Super Bowl with that defense.
No question, and we should talk about that too. That trade came down right before the last segment of our show yesterday. The Texans trading Kenyon Green and a fifth-round pick next year to the Eagles for C.J. Gardner-Johnson and a sixth-round pick next year. There were some things I learned. We'll dig deeper into these trades at 7 o'clock when we've got some runway to work with. Johnson is only 27 years old.
Yeah.
I thought he was an older player just based on the fact that he's played for so many different teams over the last few years. He started out with the Saints, went to the Eagles for a year, goes to the Lions for a year, goes back to the Eagles. So the 2 Super Bowl years, I don't know if it's coincidence or not, but he was on the team the 2 Super Bowl years and was on Detroit in between, a team that probably should have made the Super Bowl his year if they hadn't screwed up so many things against the Niners in the NFC title game. Dude, the Texans, and this guy is hard hitter. He is swarmy. He is like dangerously swarmy. They are trying to set a record for concussions administered this coming season with CJ back there. That's CJ.
And he was injured in 2023. He only played 3 games. In the last 21 regular season games, he has 13 interceptions.
Yeah.
So you
ball hawk.
Compare that to Eric Murray, who has, I think, 3 interceptions over the last several years. I can't remember the stat. It's very, very meager. It does not stack up. And that kind of ability to force turnovers, if you can just get competent play out of the offense, that makes for not just winning the division, but getting home field advantage in the playoffs, where we know this Texans pass rush and their ability to force turnovers makes a big, big difference in the playoffs.
That's so true, man. He's been near the top of the league, C.J. Gardner-Johnson has, in what they call ball hawk percentage. And it's basically just the percentage of times you've been targeted where you either get a hiccup, you're getting your hands on the ball in some way. And I'm looking at a stat here, second in the league behind Denzel Ward. Derek Stingley Jr., for context, is 5th in the league. Feels like Derek Stingley Jr. gets his hands on the ball every time it gets thrown his direction. He's 5th. C.J. Gardner-Johnson is above Derek Stingley Jr. So your secondary now has 2 guys that this ball hawk percentage matches the eye test, plus Kalen Bullock, who feels like one of those guys, plus Kamari Lassiter, who feels like one of those guys, plus there's a physicality element to him. And then you got Jalen Petrie, who this team loves and I think is going to get a second contract, who now all of a sudden is freed up to be whatever Swiss Army knife you want him to be.
Well, if you go back to the Dolphins game last year, where after the game, Tagovailoa basically, he wasn't trying to make excuses for his turnovers, which he had multiple turnovers in that game, but he basically made the point, man, it's hard to pick an easy guy to target when you're going against this defense. And that was as they were playing with two rookie defensive backs, and with Eric Murray out there as a safety in that game, if I remember correctly.
No, you're right.
It becomes that much more difficult. You throw Jalen Petrie and C.J. Gardner-Johnson into the mix, and it's a whole lot of fun.
Yeah.
It's really a whole lot of fun defensively. The swarm quotient, though, still really has to be lifted on the offensive side of the ball.
Yep. And I think the good news there is their behavior as a front office and a coaching staff on that side of the ball over the last week tells us that they know that. They've at least recognized the problem. There was a feeling that I think you and I and a lot of people had at the middle of the season when either D'Amico or Nick would talk about the offensive line, where there was this concern that they weren't seeing the same things we were. And I think in retrospect, it's probably more that they weren't going to throw guys under the bus in week 9 of the season. Like, this is we're going to love the one we're with right now, and there's no reason for us to go on talk radio or a press conference and say how bad they suck.
It was, at one point Nick said that it was a lazy narrative that the offensive line was playing poorly. I'm like, all right, well, you just got rid of 60% of that offensive line. You brought in a guard that's going to compete with some of the guys who are on the roster already. At the very least, I feel exonerated, Sean, that we are not being lazy with our narratives about the offensive line.
I just feel like
year.
I'm not cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. You know what I mean? I'm like,
because that was the only explanation is the one that you just gave, which is that they were not going to throw guys under the bus publicly, even though internally they very much knew it was an issue.
You're right.
But it was as close as I've come to feeling like I did in the Jack Easterby era, where am I cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs?
Yeah.
Like, have I lost all sense of football and how it works? Because my God, I feel like the offensive line is a huge problem.
Yes, absolutely.